Brilliant. Good afternoon and welcome to Pinhole Quilting. We are live with Angela Walters at the Festival of Quilts 2023.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
Fantastic. We're delighted to have you here. So Angela's been demonstrating and doing a lecture today, but she's now back on her stand at Pinhole Quilting at C56, and she's going to do some more demonstrations today on the brand new Amara ST, which is a sit-down long arm from Handi Quilter.
So great.
Yeah. So what would you say are the main things about the ST that you were enjoying
when you were
working?
When you're working on a sit-down machine and moving the fabric, is a lot of the smush and push, right? Like the throw space here is amazing, and it goes this way, so you can move your hands in all different directions. And so for demoing, it's perfect. For quilting big quilts, it's perfect.
Yes.
It's just a great machine. And one thing that's kind of fun is I taught way back when, 2015.
2015.
And now all these years we come back together again.
Absolutely.
It's like no time has ever passed.
It is. And at that point in time, Angela was teaching on the Sweet 16s, and things have moved on, and now we've got this lovely 20-inch.
And the insight table with the stitch regulator, top notch. So
one of the things about having someone like Handi Quilters, ambassadors like Angela Walters, is that we get some really great teaching. So when you did that class in 2015, and we did 4 days of teaching afterwards at our showroom, those people have gone on to become really fantastic quilters. And I think it's the education aspect of things and the teaching, the YouTube that everybody takes part in, that's such an important part.
I mean, Handi Quilter has tons of videos. I know that you as a dealer do a lot of education. It's just, you get this machine and what do you do with it, right? And you can do a lot of stuff. And so I know that I'm going to show a little bit of ruler work on the sit-down machine and how fun it is, and we're just having fun with it. So it's a lot of fun.
But from time to time today, I don't know whether Angela's been overwhelmed by the number of people who've come up to her and said, you made a really big difference to me doing my quilting. So, for example, we had Pauline, didn't we? Pauline, who works for us at Pinhole Quilting. She's an Amara owner, and the reason that she made that first big step in her long arm journey was because of the live stuff that you do on YouTube. And she thanked you for what you've done and stuff.
It was so sweet.
And it was, and that's the big difference, isn't it? I think that if you can get those really step changes through education and encouragement from others, whether it's a quilting friend or whatever.
For sure, and it's intimidating. I can see that. Like, you get a machine, it's big, you're like, I don't know what to do with it, but it is so much fun. And my goal is to get people over that fear, whether they're new owners, whether they're just in the show trying them out, whether they have a friend that has one. And so my job is to make it, show how fun it can be and the things it can. And I never want to be intimidating. I want to be inspiring. And so that's what I love about all the educators, whether it's somebody from your place, whether I'm in Australia, US, wherever. And I love that about quilters.
Yes, the encouragement and inspiration is really important. So, I mean, here at the show, we've got 6 long arms in our classroom, and we've got Linda Jackson and Abigail Sharon DeGraff doing those lovely sessions.
Stunning.
So, intro, and they're the award-winning quilters at international level. So one day we might win a ribbon at a show.
Maybe. I've never entered a show before.
Me neither.
Yeah, I don't know.
Let's
try it. We'll do it together.
We should do it. We should do a joint.
I'll just make us a ribbon, and we'll just say we won. It was the Festival of Quilting in Missouri, and we were best of show and first place.
We won the joint award.
All the things.
Yeah, fantastic. Anyway, so what we're going to do today, in just a moment, is going to use the ST, the Amara ST 20-inch sit-down machine, and you're going to do some ruler work and do some practice.
Yeah, so we're going to some little tips on how to use cutouts, get points, how to hold the ruler, and all that stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, have a seat, and we'll take it from there.
Come on over.
May I sit down?
You may, absolutely.
Okay.
So when we're working rulers on our long arm like this, I'm kind of approaching the way I do it a little bit differently. I'm treating my rulers almost like a handle. It's like a guide to give me those smooth-ish, straight-ish lines, right? So I'm going to show you a couple little tips and tricks to make it easier, but just know that with a little bit of practice, you'll be slinging this thing around like a ruler ninja for sure. So when you look out at the market, there's so many different rulers available, so many different kinds. I like to say that is for every quilter, but you'll find the kinds that you like. If you're newer to rulers, you're not sure about it, I always suggest a straight edge for the first, because the point of contact is always the same on the foot no matter where you are. So as I'm looking at my foot, I can position my ruler wherever I want it, no matter where. Not on. Hold on, technical difficulties. This was the one you told me to turn on, huh? It's on. It says it's on. Anyway, so the point of contact on the straight edge ruler is going to be the same no matter where I'm at. Again, with the straight edge ruler, not that you have to start here, but I definitely suggest it for quilters. So when I'm looking at my machine, I have the most control when my hands are on either side of the ruler or the foot. So as I'm quilting, I need to reposition my hands often. And for those of you that are watching live, if you saw me earlier, I like to keep quilting and I forget to move my hands, and then pretty soon I'm quilting with my elbows. So get in the habit of repositioning. So when I'm looking at my quilt, I'm going to put my ruler wherever it is I want to quilt, put my hands on either side, and I'm going to push down and move along the edge of that ruler. And when I talk about the point of contact being the same, that just means if I'm down here or up here, I'm still on that side of the ruler. Now, if I want to work on a horizontal movement, I might position it like this and then work along that. Now, no matter what kind of ruler you use or how you quilt it, the one main tip, the one thing I want to get in your brain is I never want the foot or my hand to go beyond the feet of the machine. So as I'm quilting, my foot should always be within my fingertips. As I get past my fingertips, see, now I'm kind of getting past that point, I need to either reposition or I need to shift the whole ruler. You won't have as much control. So if I'm over here and pushing down, notice how it comes up a little bit, right? It's not going to give me a smooth line, and worst case scenario, I could accidentally hit my needle and then break my ruler, break my needle, pee my pants. It's not a good thing, right? So now in the beginning, practicing horizontal and vertical lines is a great way to get comfortable with moving along the ruler, kind of repositioning. But one thing we have to consider, the kind of caveat we have here, is that there is about a 1/4 inch in between the needle and the edge. I start doing diagonal lines, and as I start wanting to end on a certain point, I might get to a situation where it's not ending perfectly on those points. Look at this, on the fly, switching it out. I love it. There we go, there we go. Why am I telling you all this? I'm not trying to say about your needle, but if I want to quilt a diagonal line, so let me, if I want to quilt a diagonal line that ends on a certain point, if I put my ruler at that point, end up about a 1/4 inch away. So quilt. One thing I like to quilt a little bit, I like to put it on that point and then back it up just a bit. We can all usually eyeball that, right? And then as I come into that point, then I'm going to... Now, it's not always going to end up exactly where you want it to. Enough is good enough. That one just happened to work out, so that's great. I'm excited about that. First, all different directions. One thing that our brains love to do is we love easy, and so we'll find ourselves always going in one, right? Always doing one thing because it's easier for us. So sometimes forcing yourself to quilt a square and then an X inside of it will force you to go up, down to up and left to right and vice versa. So as you're getting comfortable with getting used to working on all sides of your foot. So the cool thing about this machine specifically, it has the ruler foot on it. And I can work from all different sides of that foot. So if you feel more comfortable holding the ruler like this, great. Whatever you feel comfortable doing. But mine is to go like that. Now, once you get comfortable with that straight edge ruler, then you can branch out into all the different kinds of rulers that are out there. And when we start looking at curved rulers, we're starting to see that the point of contact is going to change depending on where we are on the ruler. So, for instance, if I want to quilt along this Taj shape, as I come up the side, my foot is on the side of here, but as I come up here, it's more towards the bottom. It's just one more thing to think of. What happens is sometimes we get to quilting and we go, whoop, off, right? Anybody else do that, or is it just me? Okay, good, not just me. So when I'm quilting along that, especially here, remember when I said you have most of your control when your hands are on either side of the foot? As I move and that my hands are on one side, I need to stop and switch. So just taking your time, you're trying, just watching and repositioning as you go. So as I position it using the reference lines to help put it where I want it to go, I'm just going to carefully quilt along that curve, being really aware of where that point of contact needs to be, and then coming up to that point. Now I made that look easy because I practiced right before we went live, right? But here's the thing, there's that 1/4 inch in between the needle and the edge of the foot, right? I've already said that. If I go around my point, I'm going to get a rounded shape, which is fine, but if I want that nice point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quilt all the way up to the very tip until I can't go any further, and then I'm going to shift it to the other side and come back down. And that's going to give me that nice sharp point you have there, right? So just that little bit of shift will help you there. I'm going to do that whether it's my Taj ruler whether it's a 90-degree ruler, because if I want that nice sharp one, I can just reposition it. If you're like, oh, I didn't even know I had to worry about that, well then don't. Right? It's a more rounded look, it's fine. So as I've quilted now, I can easily reposition. Again, if I was putting this on an actual quilt, I would use my reference to make sure that it's staying where it needs to go, and I can continue on. Let's do it one more time. So I'm going to come in to my point, shift to the other side. I might go ahead and switch hands and then go right on down. So for those nice points, that's how. Now for cutouts though, if I'm going along the inside of a cutout, that point is going to happen naturally, right? So I don't have to worry about that. To do that part, I'm going to raise up my needle, and Handi Quilter has a nice narrowing right under the foot here, so I can just sweep it right in there and put it in. Once I have it in position, I'm not going to take it out of there, right? So I'm going to position my ruler where I want, and I'm going to quilt along it. Now, I think some quilters might find working with cutouts a little bit easier because you have a handle on both. If I wanted to do like a motif, right, I could reposition, put it where I need it to go. Repositioning the ruler, I'm just going kind of slow so you can see what I'm doing here. Again, working along that curve, taking my time, and just continuing repositioning, and I will get that nice little motif, if that's the effect I'm going for. But using our rulers in a lot of different ways will help us get the most out of our rulers, make them more useful. So one of the ways I like to use it is to go in all different directions, kind of like a meander or as an element to draw attention. So to do that, I'm not going to always start right where I end. That sounded confusing. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to quilt along the inside of my shape, but before I reposition, I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, and then I can reposition my ruler. One of the great things, so if I, let's say here, and I have a little bit of overlap, that means my quilting might overlap, right? So I can audition where I want it to go, decide, okay, that's it, I have chosen you, you're where you're going to go, and then continue on. And this is the same whether you use this shape. There's circle cutouts, there's cutouts like this that make a different shape. But again, the trick to remember, if I'm going to go in all different directions, I'm going to add a little bit of traveling. So that I can go here. If I just leave that ruler in place, I'm just going right over it and then position it where I want it to go. Now, one thing I always say, and if you went to my lecture already, you've already heard this, but not every ruler is for every quilter. You might see something like this and think, oh, I can do a leafy meander, no problem, I don't need the ruler. That's great. Or you might think, ooh, that one was made for me. So as you're working, oh, I have to use every single ruler. I mean, unless you want it. If you want the justification, by all means. But you'll find that there are rulers that you like to use more. What ruler you use, the one thing I want you to remember is that it's a tool. It's not a crutch. If I make these cute little leafy all over at quilting it without the ruler, then I can use it for something else, right? So don't feel like you always have to do it. Little guy, lots of fun. So when you're playing with rulers that you have, directions, try overlapping them, try going in placement. Or if I want to go in a straight line, maybe I want a border design, I want it to be more of an element, I can be more intentional about the placement to make that happen. So let's pretend I want to quilt it like it's a border. So I'll quilt along the inside. Now I'm going to travel, but I'm going to travel maybe to this point. And this ruler particularly has reference lines, or you could just gauge where you want to be, and then I'm going to shift it over and do the next one. Right? So if I want it to overlap, I can quilt along the whole thing. If I want to go behind it, I can do that too. Just can play around and find some different effects. So here we go. So maybe I'm going to have overlap, and I'm going to go back to that reference line, where I want it to go. I can always audition and see where it's going to be, and then continue on. If I want to turn the corner, I can just turn it like that. Got kind of lost there for a second. I'm like, where am I at? And you can just shift it over. And depending on how dense you want the quilting is how you can work with that. Now, sometimes if you don't have a ruler that has a cutout like this, so I can kind of shift in there. If it's closed off, like sit, that you can actually physically pick up the Handi Quilter foot. It's not as easy, but either way will work. When we're working with our rulers, let's say we want to do something like this shape. what this is going to do is give us those nice diagonal lines with all the reference points. So if you've ever been to a show and saw everybody demonstrate some diamond shapes, again, since that's a point, I'm going to shift it, go to my needle stop, and then work on the other side. One of the great things about quilting on a sit-down, change the orientation of your quilt. You can go with both hands. You might find it a little bit easier. If I was doing this on a stand-up machine, I would have to hold this a different way. So there are some benefits. Straight line. So what this is doing is pretty much the same job as the straight edge. It's just giving me less repositioning to do it. Now, one thing you should know about me, it's kind of embarrassing. I am like an efficient quilter to the nth degree. Like if I cannot shift that ruler a couple times, then that saves me a little bit of time. I think that comes from quilting a lot when my children were young and having limited quilting time. Now they don't ever want to be around me, so I have a lot more quilting time than I used to have. It's so funny. So here, one of the things you can do as you're trying to play with your rulers and decide how you're going to use them, try overlapping them, try rotating them, try combining them with other shapes. It's really going to open up a whole new world. A new world. I'm breaking a song for you guys, but I won't. A whole new world of quilting designs. Again, it's just acting as a template, as a guide. But does that mean that you have to have a straight edge ruler to quilt straight lines on a sit-down machine? No, you could do it freehand, of course. But if you want to get into those more complex designs, those curves, those arcs, whatever those shapes are, you might find using a ruler a little easier. And one thing I will say all the time is this is something that will grow with you on your quilting journey. So if you're a brand new quilter, you can use rulers and benefit from it. If you are an established quilter with lots of bad habits, you can still use rulers and it will still grow with you. So the idea here is it's definitely worth learning. Now, if you're not sure what shapes to work with or what to work on, start with a straight edge, see if you like that. But if you have a friend with a lot of rulers, see if you can borrow some of theirs and see which ones you like. Yes. So here I'm just kind of overlapping to get this kind of diamond shape. This is going to be great for bigger borders, for blocks. And again, I'm just kind of quilting this on blank fabric. If I was working on a quilt, I could use the reference lines to help make sure they're spaced out. And I could even do another row but flip it the other direction and have an even bigger design. So when you're working with your rulers, trying to see how many different ways you can create shapes. Now we saw how to use the center point as a motif. It started, but let's do a bigger one, right? Let's see what that would look like. So when you're working along your rulers, that's my point. I like to joke, you plot the whole thing, but you don't have to use the whole thing. Is that the way? So if I want it to come to a point, maybe I don't want this shape. I want it to be pointy on both sides, right? So I quilt along that. I can reposition and put that ruler where I want it to be. I can use it to create the shape I want it to be. Now remember I said if you're on a sit-down, you can easily change the orientation of your quilt. If I need to, this is easier for me, I can do it. Or I can just get comfortable working from all sides of the foot. It just depends on how big of a quilt you're working on, your preferences, how much you love the person you're quilting it for. I mean, this stuff all really, if they're quilt worthy, right? You can love somebody, but they cannot be quilt worthy, right? Don't forget, you can reposition your hands, especially on the sit down. Take your time, pause, and continue on. I know sometimes we think we have to just quilt without stopping or breathing or any of that. It's really going to help make that look easier. So let me show you that again. So audition, audition, audition. See where your line's going to go. See what you want it to look like. But remember, we're going to have that 1/4 inch in between the needle and the edge of the foot. So if I'm working on a motif, I can say, now I want this to overlap a little bit. But look what's happening. My hands are both on one side of the needle, right? That Angela. So I'm going to reposition my hands. If I just were to come on down, I would get that border kind of shape we did over here. But since I want it to end, I can reposition and rotate it. I can always audition it. I can always project where it's going to land. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not, but close enough is definitely good enough, right? So knowing I need about a 1/4 inch in between the edge of the foot and that point. 1/4 inch between the ruler and that point. Keep your hands closed and then move along. You can keep rotating, right? That's a cute little tulip. I can just stop right there. Now here's one thing I really love, and this is where I usually lose a lot of quilters. You don't have to use your rulers for all the things. I love to switch in and out of using rulers and free motions. What does that even mean, Angela? That means if I quilted this shape and I want to echo around it, I probably am not going to reposition my ruler to do that. You could, you could, but I already have that guide, so I can just kind of put my ruler off to the side, kind of just echo around the outside and get that kind of effect. So don't feel like you have to use it for all the things. Now, if somebody's watching on Facebook Live, they've done clicked off, they're like, no way, you lost me there. You can use the rulers if you need to, just know that you don't have to. It's also encouraging because what if you quilt this design, and let me rotate it so maybe online can see it. What if you quilt with the rulers and you don't like how it turned out? Maybe you had too many glasses of wine. Sometimes that happens. Adding more lines to it, filling it in is going to help kind of make it look better. So I might say, you know what? Maybe I'll add a couple echo lines in here and call it good. Just know that you can kind of help hide some of those unintentional customizations as you're quilting. Add a couple of echoes in here. And pretty soon the lines are all going to blend together and you're not going to see one over the other, right? So the trick here is to keep going until you're happy with the way it turns out. Now, I know we're on Facebook Live, but I can't see any questions coming through. I'm so sorry. But anybody have any questions here that's watching live at the show about rulers or want to see something specifically?
Is it just practice that means you can get your free motion so even on both sides?
Yes. So the question was, is it just practice that helps me get my free motions even on both sides? Yes. I'm sorry. That consistency is going to come with practice. But here's the good thing, right? When we learn to write our letters, we write our letters all different sizes, and then we learn how to write our name. And have you noticed every time you sign your name on a line, it always fits that line? It's because you practiced. So try to enjoy the fact that we're just kind of learning the process and going with it. But yeah, keeping that consistent, getting comfortable working with both sides does take practice, but it doesn't take as much as you might think. Right? You get a whole big, like a yard of fabric, start quilting. I bet you'll be a professional by the time you're done with it. Any other questions? Any free motion designs we want to see? What? Yep, what threads do I use? So the most important thing to remember is Handi Quilters will run with any high quality machine quilting thread. Beyond that, it's the whole world. Now, they have lovingly put Glide in here. So Glide is my favorite thread because it has a little bit of sheen. It's strong, it's 40 weight, so newer quilters will handle that tension of quilting. It looks beautiful. But if you want, maybe you want the quilting to blend in a little bit more, then you would use a thinner thread, maybe a 50 weight so fine. So really, it just depends on the effect you're going for. But Glide is my favorite. But I should say, I collect threads the way that some people collect fabrics. I have way more thread than fabric. I love all the colors, I love all the weights, and it's just like fun to lay them out and audition them.
Keeping the speed.
Great point. So keeping the speed low, how is that helping? That is me demonstrating. So when I'm demonstrating, I have the regulator on. I'm kind of going slow so we can see how it comes together. But just like driving a car, we all have different settings. If you got in my car, it would be not set up for you, right? So when I'm at home and I'm quilting for fun, I like to use the manual. What manual does is when I push it down, it's just going to go. And then so this is how I might quilt if I was just working on a regular quilt. Now the thing about manual is if I go slow, I'm going to get lots of little stitches. If I move the fabric fast, I'll get bigger stitches. So it's more organic stitch length. So this is more for a design that you already know how to quilt. This is if, I like the sound of it personally, but honestly, if I'm being truthful, I just learned without a stitch regulator, so that's why I do it better. So it just depends. I will say, if you're trying to quilt swirls or lines and you're having trouble getting that smooth line, you may be going too slow. We want that momentum to help carry us through. If I'm moving really slow, it gives me too much time to correct what I'm doing, right? So focus on momentum, focus on keeping it smooth and it's going fine. Rulers, I would go slower, yeah. So depending on the design, depending on what I'm working on, that I would change the speed. So big swirls, I might go faster. Pebbles, I'm going to slow it down. And so being able to adjust the speed on this machine, I can say, you know what, I'm going to set it this, and I'm going to put my pedal all the way down. So I don't have to adjust my foot. My pedal is all the way down, or I can push the button and just go. And so yeah, I would go a little bit slower with rulers. I go a little bit slower with smaller designs, just like driving a car, right? If I'm going down a road with lots of stop signs, I'm going to go slower than on the Autobahn, which is fun. Let me tell you. Our kids are like, oh, this is so cool. Anyway, so yeah, depending on the design, and you'll figure it out. But the fun part about quilting is everybody is different. That makes teaching and presenting on Facebook Live so fun and unique. But you shouldn't go slow enough that you can critique the job you're doing while you're doing it. So if you're like, this swirl isn't looking very round, that swirl's not looking very round, that's too slow. Now, I don't want you going so fast that you're out of control, but you should be like, oh, I hope that swirl looked good because I'm already moved on to the next one. Save it for when you're done with the whole area, then you can pause, look at it, critique it, kind of stuff. Wasn't that a long answer to your question? It's like, I'm not asking any more questions. Uh-oh. Is that better? There we go. Got mics everywhere. Any other questions? I answered every question we have about machine quilting. Wow.
This morning you said something about the machine knowing the fabric is in it.
So the stitch regulator, how does that work when I have the fabric like this? There's actually, under here, 2 sensors that are gauging the movement of the fabric, and that's how the machine is speeding up and slowing down. So on stitch regulated, I can set how many stitches per inch I want. And that, again, depends on your preferences. If I'm doing tiny pebbles, I might do 13 stitches per inch, or I can do whatever. Right now I have it on 12. So when I start quilting, it's going, but as I speed up, the machine will speed up, and then it will slow down depending on how I'm moving it. So it's giving me that consistency. So my foot is not on the pedal, it is solely by those sensors and by the movement of the fabric. It's great because when you're learning a design, if you're like, okay, where do I go next? I don't know where to go. It just gives you a second to kind of think through. And my biggest habit, look, I need to reposition my hands, right? Yeah, but again, whatever setting you use is just dependent on whatever your preferences are. Liz, is there any questions on Facebook anybody has, or anybody here have any questions?
What's your favourite free motion motif to use or to do? Do you have one?
What's my favorite free motion motif? They're like my children, right? Like, the one I'm with is my favorite. I go through phases, right? So sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to quilt a swirl. That's usually my go-to. If I'm demonstrating, it's usually a swirl. But usually I switch it up. So whatever I've done previously, I do the opposite before. So if I've been doing a lot of swirls, I might be like, oh, now I want to do a geometric motif. That's just how my brain stays interested in what I'm doing. I switch it up a lot. But I would have to say swirls, elongated swirls probably would be my favorite. But it's funny because every quilter has a different one that they get comfortable with, right? The one that makes more sense. Swirls came pretty naturally to me, or easier than like feathers or even geometric shapes. But then I'll be in a class and I'll have a quilter that, it's like, oh, I can't do swirls, but I can do micro stippling. And I'm like, oh, well, I can't do that. So if you already doodle something or draw something a lot, like, oh, I always draw little flowers, then that's a good design to start with because you already know the path. I would say 80% of quilting is just knowing where you're going. I totally made that up, but I think it sounds right. And so here, with all this change in direction, that stitch regulator should help keep my spacing the same. And I could go faster too, but this has a very powerful motor, so it'll do as fast as I can move it. My hands aren't really easy. Now, when you're working on any sit down like this where you have the quilt here, the thing to remember is we're fighting against gravity, right? I don't want anything pulling. So this is a nice little quilt sandwich that's easy to manage, but if this were a quilt, I want everything up, right? I don't want anything pulling because I have to fight against that. Another thing that's very important if you're sitting down to quilt, whether it's a sewing machine or this beautiful machine right here, is you want to have the right height. Now this is really cool because it has an adjustable height. You can go real high or real low. You can actually stand to quilt at it if you wanted. But I want to be high enough that I'm pushing down on the quilt. I don't want to be T-Rexing, right? Because I'm not using gravity to my advantage there. So this is a really good height for me. If you find yourself quilting like this, it's going to be easier to get up a little bit higher. Whether you have the ability to raise your feet, sit on some cushions, sit on some quilts, whatever you do. Or if you have this, you can just adjust the table. It also has wings that come up too for those larger quilts, so that you're not, repositioning all the time. It's just finding that sweet spot or that part to make it as easy as possible. Go back to manual. Going back to my happy place. Now, just like rulers, there's no set order in which you have to learn a design, right? So if you're like, okay, I better start with meander and then I have to do the whatever, you can go any design, anytime, whatever you feel like quilting. The trick though is just leave yourself some grace and just work through it. As long as everything is filled in as consistently as possible, it's going to look nice. I'm just trying not to leave any gaps in there. Now, I already said consistency will come with practice. It won't take as much as you might think. But one helpful tip is I like to use the foot of my machine as a guide. So let's say I want to quilt around this swirl, and I want the spacing to be about 1/4 inch. As I come around, I can run the foot of my machine along that previously quilted line, and that's going to help give that spacing. Another thing that'll be really helpful with your quilting, no matter what kind of machine or situation you're in, you're going to look ahead of where you're going. Don't look right at the needle. I'm looking in the direction I'm heading and trusting my hands to bring me to it. Right? So if I know I'm looking over here, my eye is constantly ahead, so I can make adjustments as I go. Think about driving a vehicle. I don't just look at the edge of the hood and drive, right? I'm looking on down the road. That gives me time to adjust. Think about driving down a dead-end road. We don't get to the very end of the dead end and like, oh, now I need to figure something out. We start our turn forward. So I know it's scary because we think, oh, if I just look at the needle, it'll be better, but it really isn't. You also might think if I just quilt slower and hold my breath, it'll be better. But honestly, trying to get that nice momentum down will really help. I've been away from my long arm for a couple weeks, and I miss it. The problem is during my demos, I find myself not talking and just quilting. No, talk, Walters, you need to do some demos. Good question. So when I'm quilting, listening to music, I love to listen to music. What I'm listening to doesn't really affect what I'm quilting because I'm good enough to separate, or not good enough. That sounded very I feel comfortable keeping them separate. But if I'm tired, I'll listen to more upbeat stuff. But I do love a good audiobook. A trashy book is always good. So why audiobooks? Well, it keeps me engaged because it's kind of like, meditative. But if you're newer to quilting and you're like just overthinking it, you might find it easier to distract that critical part of your brain. Distracting it, keeping it distracted a little bit will allow your hands to do what they want to do. Sometimes we just need to get out of our own way, right? So sometimes I'll tell people, have a glass of wine. It releases your inhibitions. If you're not a drinker, have some chocolate. Listen to an audiobook. In a class, like when I was in Liz's class, I would talk to people. And it doesn't always work, but somebody's quilting, I'm like, tell me what you had for lunch. Tell me. And it just distracts that bit so they can get out of their own head. Because sometimes we're so busy worrying about it, we just need to let our hands do what they need to do. So I listen to audiobooks for that reason, but definitely not required, but it does help that. Plus, if I'm quilting when my children were younger, if I had my headphones on, I couldn't hear them when they needed me. So I'm very fortunate. I have a really nice quilting room, and there's a door at the end. Well, here's a funny joke. Sorry, I'm getting off my demo, but you have to go through this door, and there's the laundry room. And past the laundry room is my quilting room. That's a joke, right? Like, I'm never stopping at the laundry room, going on to the quilting room. But I can close that door, and it does have glass panes, so you can see it. It's like over there. See out the corner of my eye. But if I have my headphones on, I don't make eye contact. I just lock the door, and the kids couldn't get in. I am a good mom, though. Trust me. Just not at night, right? I'm good every other day. So audiobooks are headphones. My husband gifted me some beautiful Beats headphones over the ear, comfortable. I love this. Because like when I was quilting for customers, I'd be quilting for a long time. I'm getting way off topic here. So kind of fun. Any design requests? A feather? Oh yeah, let's do a feather. Let's do custom feather. All right, so wait for it. It's echoing to maneuver my way around the area. So I love feathers. That was the one design, I talked about this earlier, that was the one design I struggled with, quilting feathers. When I started quilting, I'm like, I'll never get this. And it was funny because back then, back in my day, we didn't have Instagram and stuff, there was just a Yahoo forum, and I would print out pictures of people's quilts. And I'd be like, why can't I do it like Kimmy Bruner? But I finally got it. So basically, it's going to start with a stem or a spine. I like to make mine a little curvy because I think it looks nice. And because I'm kind of out here in the middle of nowhere, it's the first one, I'm going to put a little teardrop. It's going to be kind of like the base of my feather. Now from here, I'm going to start building off of those and adding groups of two. So one will come out, we'll touch, and I'll backtrack. The next one. Now here's the thing with this design though. As you're quilting, if that backtracking isn't perfect, you need to rip it all out and start again. I'm kidding. Even if it's not perfect, I'm going to eventually put other stuff around it. It's going to be fine, right? I think people notice a gap before they notice an error. So this unquilted area is going to be the part that pops out. You have to remember that. And so don't stress out too much about it. But I will tell you the one thing that helped me finally make my feathers look nice was realizing I needed to quilt those petals so that they look like they were merging into the spine. That's what gives it that elegant, pretty look. Now, if you already feel comfortable quilting feathers a certain way, don't change it based on what I'm doing. Stay in that lane. But I like to quilt all of one side, and then I'll echo back to the bottom and do the other side. That's just how I like to do it. Some people will do both sides as they go up. Whatever you will do is what you should do. But that's how I have to do it. I will tell you very common issues with feathers or common struggles I see quilters make is we forget to make that line look like it's merging into a spine. That just doesn't hurt the feather, it just doesn't look quite as nice in my opinion. Another thing is, especially when we're learning, we're just so scared to quilt it big and extend it out there. But feathers look nice when they're big and round and curvy. I want a lot of that unquilted area, so don't be hesitant to really extend them out. One thing you can do is after you quilt your spine, you can mark out a reference line over here to give you a guide to quilt your feathers out to. I don't want you to do it so long you feel uncomfortable, but we definitely want to, make them nice and big. Here's why. It looks better, but also it quilts quicker. It takes up more of the area. It's more of a focal point. Now, again, I'm only the expert in my opinion, so take that for what it's worth, but that's how I like to quilt it. Now, once I quilt my feather, so I have my little feather right here, just kind of hanging out. Once I quilt it, then I decide what do I want to put around it. Because what I put around the feather is as important as the feather itself. If I want to hide it, I don't love how it turned out, I don't want it to be such a big element to the quilt, I'm going to put something similar around it. So I'm going to put, some big swirls, something with similar spacing. I might do some bigger echoes. I might add a few more petals in here. So what's going to happen is since it's similar, it's all going to kind of blend together. It's going to let you see that overall texture. Or if I quilt it and I'm like, dang, that was good. I like that feather. I'm moving it around so you'll see a little better. I wouldn't necessarily move it on the actual quilt. If I want it to show off more, I'm going to put something different around it. So something with different density, maybe like a close echo line. Something with different direction. You could do a wishbone or a back and forth line. And different shape, right? So basically, the more contrast we have, I'm losing my words. The more contrast I have in the filler, the more that feather's going to show up. Right? So I said this earlier, and if you were at the earlier demo, you've already heard it, but I don't think I'm a better quilter than anybody. I'm just really, really good at hiding my mistakes. I'm very good at it. So knowing that what I put around it is going to help highlight it or hide it, is going to help show it off. If I really want it to be like, check this out, I'm really, really proud of it, I can just dance back and forth lines. So this is good news. This means that if you quilt something and you don't love it, you don't have to rip it out, you just put other stuff around it. It's also the case, maybe I did quilt a beautiful feather, but it's not meant to be like, whoa, there's a feather. It's meant to be a hint or a little bit of movement, then having something similar around it will help with that. So again, whether that's a feather, whether it's a motif, whether it's a ruler design like we saw earlier, what you put around it is as important as the design itself.
Do you personally prefer normal, stand-up machine or sit-down?
Yep. So what's my preference, a stand-up or a sit-down? So I went from hand quilting to longarming. My husband and I, we did not know that you could quilt on a sewing machine, and I thank God every day. He would have bought me longer. So for me, stand-up longarm, where you move the machine, is my first language. But there are limitations, right? I have to start from the top and work my way down. I can't change the orientation of the quilt, and I can't start anywhere I want. Sit-down machine, you have to make your quilt sandwich. It's a little bit slower, but I can start wherever I want. I have my hands on the quilt. This machine, I can adjust the height of it. So it just depends on your preferences. I'm kind of mitigating here, can you tell? Like, I do the stand-up better, but there are pluses and minuses to both. I will say, I feel like most quilters don't use the equipment they have to its full capability. Yeah. Right? So you can do this on any machine. Now, don't let me stop you from buying a beautiful, sweet, because it's like a car, right? They all do the same job. What kind of ride do you want, right? So the idea here is, there are pluses and minuses to both. I will say for the sit-down, it's great for space. It's great for somebody that wants their hands on the quilt. For somebody that maybe can't stand for long periods of time or want the capability to adjust. But moving the machine is fun too, and that's what's great about Handi Quilter. There's a machine for every situation there. So.